All right, everybody. We've still got some more people joining us, but I'm going to kick it off. Welcome, everybody. Thanks for being here with us. I'm Ariel Cates. I'm the Director of Programming at Village Preservation. Just a little bit about Village Preservation, though you likely know, those of you who are here with us, we have been documenting, celebrating, and fighting for the preservation of Greenwich Village, the East Village, and Noho since 1980. We work to expand and extend landmark and zoning protections and stop inappropriate development while also encouraging appropriate development in our neighborhoods. We host roughly 75 programs a year, all of which are now virtual and most of which are free and open to the public. Our events are meant to illuminate the cultural and architectural heritage, history and depth, and the value of preservation, and for today, adaptive reuse in our communities. We are a nonprofit, membership-based organization, so your involvement and support mean the world to us. You can learn more at our website, villagepreservation.org, and please consider becoming a member or making a donation if you're able at villagepreservation.org/donate. We call our home the village, but it is also unceded traditional land of the Lenape people. I want to acknowledge in this archival recording the Lenape community and especially their elders, past and present, and express gratitude for their stewardship of this land, for contributing to its geography, and for the use of their language as place names. If you'd like to find out more about this, please reach out. I'm glad to offer resources. So just a little bit of Zoom protocol. Though I won't be visible, I will be here the whole time. Please feel free to use the chat to say hi, tell us where you're joining from, or raise any issues or thoughts. If you have questions specifically for Sarah, please use the Q&A function. It just helps me to track your questions. You can submit those at any point during the talk, and we'll get to as many of those as we can once Sarah is done. So I am very pleased to introduce our brilliant speaker. Sarah Bean Apmann is Village Preservation's Director of Research and Preservation. She has worked as an architectural historian in historic preservation for the past 20 years. She received her BA in history from Lehigh University and her MS in historic preservation from Columbia University. So Sarah, thank you for being here with us this afternoon. Take us away.
Okay. I think we have to revise that because I know I'm well over 20 years now. But anyway, thank you so much for having me. This is a new presentation that I've crafted. It was based on the fact that I was asked, I've been asked a couple of times by a friend of mine who teaches UPenn Art Law to talk to her class about historic preservation. And this year she asked me to also include adaptive reuse. And I mostly talked about historic preservation, but then I started looking at examples of adaptive reuse in our area. And I thought, this is kind of fun and it would kind of make a great presentation. So you guys are all seeing this for the first time. Sensitive adaptive reuse is a historic preservationist's best friend. And today we're going to try and explore some examples of that throughout our neighborhoods. The hardest part was culling the list of buildings that I'm going to present. I tried to present a diversity in terms of area, in terms, there's some that you'll all go, oh yeah, we know all about that one already. But you have to show the biggies. But then I also hope that everybody walks away with at least one where they didn't know the history, they didn't know the reuse, and maybe are surprised by it. No doubt I will be receiving emails or questions saying, why didn't you also include this? I welcome it because I said this is the first time that I'm doing this presentation. And I find that as I represent, presentations grow and become even better. So that's what I look forward to. So when I first started thinking of adaptive reuse in our area, East Village, Greenwich Village, Noho, Gansevoort Ward, South Village, south of Union Square, the first thing that came to mind was the row house. This was the earliest extant building type in our area. Here I show you the range that we typically see in terms of style. You see the federal houses on Commerce Street, the more grand Greek Revival row houses on Washington Square North, and to the lovely Italianate houses on West 12th Street. And with the exception of some of the early modest federal houses or some of the more modest Greek Revival houses, these houses were primarily built as single family housing. I always show these maps. I love these maps. So here are the maps from the mid-19th century that show the predominance of the row house at that time in our areas. The one to the left shows the area around Washington Square Park. The one to the right shows the area around Tompkins Square Park. The row houses are represented by the red rectangles, indicating that they're masonry. In some cases, I don't know if some of you can see this, depending on how big your computer screen is, you'll see a little slash of yellow behind these red rectangles. That's indicating typically that it's a T-porch, which was common, especially with the Greek Revival style. And so you can see how prevalent the building type was. As the demographics of many of these areas changed, many of the row houses were repurposed, many just as multifamily housing, and some for other purposes, such as institutional. So here's our first example over 84 2nd Avenue. It was originally built as a Greek Revival style row house. You see that in the historic drawing number 1 on the right-hand side of your screen. This 4-story with an attic building was part of a row of houses at 78 to 84 2nd Avenue, owned by Elisha Peck. In 1884, this building was Irene Stennard's temporary home for women. Investigator, journalist Nellie Bly checked herself into this boarding house, feigning insanity, to get sent to the insane asylum on Blackwell Island to expose its horrific conditions. And she mentions her stay at 84 2nd Avenue in her book, 10 Days in a Madhouse. This building features planar brick facade, molded galvanized iron lintels. The lintels likely date to the 19th century. The existing 2-story front, which shows its alteration to commercial purposes as well as residential above, was installed most likely in 1909, and that is when the stoop was removed, the original stoop, which again you see in the drawing on the right-hand side of the screen. Whoops. Sorry, when I use 2 screens, I always lose my cursor. I figure by the time that COVID is done, I'll have this sort of, presenting on Zoom down, but until then, I'm still working on it. So I also just wanted to include, because I know that there are people who are watching who are from the East Village, and I think that they would have thought I was remiss if I didn't show the current appearance of 84 2nd Avenue. This was just a recent renovation that was done of the building. And for those of you that are interested, I did check with LPC, and the original tiles that were down at the storefront entryways will be reinstalled. So here we have another example of an interesting row house adaptive reuse. This particular one has had a really interesting history that we're still working on. It's first of all interesting that this building, this little row house, survived in the midst of some more commercial buildings in this area south of Union Square, but also the uses that ensued later in both the 19th century and the 20th century. It was built in 1846 to 47 and originally home to William Fash, who was a wood carver. We looked at the city directories, and other people within the building trade also lived at this building. The original street number was 64. And you can see it on the 1854 map here, and it includes a rear building, which I believe had to do with the carpentry trade, given who was living there at that time. Circa 1858, it was bought by Jacob Day, who was an African-American who made his money in the catering business and reinvested his money in real estate, making him a very, very wealthy man, as documented by the newspapers from the time. He also, interestingly, he lived here and had his catering business here. He also took in boarders Most of the boarders were African-American women who were either widowed or teachers, one of which was for a very nearby school on 17th Street. This was also home during the 20th century to off Broadways for more than 60 years. It also played an incredibly important role in the development of theater in New York, including African-American and LGBTQ theater. The 13th Street Repertory Theater has been located here since 1972 and helped launch the careers of Bette Midler, Barry Manilow, Chaz Palminteri, Richard Dreyfuss, Christopher Maloney, and many others. It was also the home of the longest running play in off-Broadway theater history, Israel Horowitz's play Line. So you can see the incredible reuses of what started as this little, rather modest row house from the 1840s in the middle of 13th Street. Now, number 270 Bleecker Street really exemplifies the trend of not just taking a row house and chopping up the interior to accommodate multifamilies, but actually converting it into what was really the earliest versions of tenements. This was originally constructed in 1834 for developer Charles Oakley. And you can see probably what it looked like originally by looking at the building to the left. If you chop off that top floor to the left, you can see the lintels and the original brickwork. It was purchased in 1867 by Richard Dugdale and his family, who took up residence there, but also ran a boarding house. Records from the time indicate the house was extended to cover the entire lot and not have a open rear lot anymore, and raised to 4 stories, again, between 1868 and 69. Tenants of number 270 Bleecker Street, according to the 1880 census, included Richard and Anna Dugdale and their 3 grown children, 13 male boarders, and 1 servant. Between the 1870s and 1880s, a lot of the buildings in this area that you see like this give this appearance that started as row houses and were converted into tenements. One of the ways you can tell is by the addition of the top floor along with the cornice. And now we turn to the adaptive reuse of row houses by the art community, which would begin during the end of the 19th century and then really flourish in the 20th century. This is 90 Grove Street. It was home to artist Robert Frederick Blum. He purchased what was an original row house, federal style row house, which was built in 1827. In 1893, and he commissioned Carrere and Hastings to redesign it using Paris studios for their inspiration. Carrere and Hastings is also known for designing the main branch of the New York Public Library, the Henry Clay Frick House, which is now the Frick Museum. So there's a double height studio on the upper floors, which introduced studio windows, which were north facing to the area, and these would proliferate in Greenwich Village. Pictures show the structure today at the time of designation in the 1960s and an early 20th century down at the bottom on the left-hand side. I also show you here 24 and 26 West 10th Street. These were part of a terrace of brownstone Anglo-Italianate structure houses that were built in the 19th century and are attributed to James Renwick Jr. in 1856. And here is the introduction of what we just talked about in terms of using the studio window to convert these buildings into artist buildings, or sometimes buildings that seemed like they were for artists but would be rented by other people who wanted to be seen as fashionable at that time during the 1920s. Here we have an example of a row house that was converted into a religious structure and then into a community center. This is my colleague Louisa Winchell gave me 2 suggestions. This was one, you'll see the other next for this presentation. The colorful building at 638 East 6th Street was erected as a brick dwelling in 1846. By 1870, it had been converted to a synagogue, and it served in that capacity through the 1970s. At that time, however, the building was abandoned until a group of mothers living on East 6th Street between Avenue B and Avenue C formed the 6th Street Block Association and began working at this location. After many years of grassroots organizing and fundraising, the Block Association was finally able to purchase and renovate the building. And today, the 6th Street Community Center has supported economic and community development in a number of ways, through after-school programs, summer programs, tenants' rights advocacy, life skills and career development training. It is organized around sustainable urban living, agriculture, and local environmental justice through community outreach and public art projects. And this building is not landmarked. I haven't gotten into what every building is, whether it's landmarked or not, but this is one of the ones where I sit there and go, it really should be. So next we get to the other building that Louisa was kind enough to suggest for me. The building, we're still in the East Village. The building at 155 First Avenue was erected in 1838 by New York City as the First Avenue Retail Market. This was one of the first and largest of dozens of marketplaces developed by Mayor Fiorello LaGuardia, who was New York's first Italian-American mayor, which was done to provide safe, sanitary, and organized indoor spaces for the city's peddlers and carts previously spread around New York's overcrowded streets. Dozens of these marketplaces were built across the city, all bearing a similar works progress administration inspired Art Deco streamlined look like we see here. It also gave thousands of merchants for the first time a controlled environment within which to sell their goods, and millions of New Yorkers to a more orderly place within which to shop for them. At the core of what was then the East Village's Italian-American corridor along First Avenue, the market held cheese, meat, olives, Italian delicacy vendors, among many others. However, by 1965, the markets faced overwhelming competition from supermarkets. The First Avenue retail market was forced to close, and the Department of Sanitation took over the building. Over 2 decades later, in 1986, Theater for the New City was founded in 1970, moved here, and gave the building a new purpose at last. This organization transformed the space into a venue showcasing avant-garde artists, writers, performers. In addition to providing exhibition space, Theater for the New City premieres more than 30 full-length dramas, comedies, musicals each year. This organization was a Village Preservation Awardee in 2018. The 16-story condo above the theater, aka Theater for the New City, was completed in 2001 after a partnership of 2 developers bought the air rights over the original structure. This, based on the agreement among the theater, the city, and the developers, helped with the mortgage for the theater. In residence at the theater is the Thunderbird American Indian Dancers, which was founded in 1963 to keep alive the traditions, songs, and dances they had learned from their parents, and added to this knowledge from other tribes also living in New York. It is the oldest resident Native American dance company in New York City and one of the oldest in the United States. And I can't leave the East Village without talking about the Anthology Film Archives. I have to say, when I was talking about trying to cull the list, the East Village was definitely one of the hardest areas because the East Village reuses buildings a lot. So this is 32 to 34 2nd Avenue, which was constructed in 1917 to 1919 as a magistrate court, becoming Lower Manhattan's magistrate court house by 1948. By the 1960s, the building was abandoned by the city and no longer used as a courthouse. From about 1966 to 1968, the film project resided at this location before moving to its longtime home at 66 East 4th Street. After another period of neglect, Anthology Film Archives purchased the building in 1979. They were the Anthology Film Archives was originally founded in 1969. This is a picture of the condition in 1970. Anthology Film Archives is the leading organization of its kind. It's not only worked to preserve the building, but also to exhibit and preserve over 20,000 films, 5,000 videos, 2,000 audio tapes, and a library of books, periodicals, photographs, posters, and ephemera. It's a crucial part of the East Village, Lower East Side Historic District, which was landmarked in 2012. And it was a Village awardee in 2018, well deserved. So now we're gonna move a little west, but I promise we're gonna sort of be skipping all over the place geographically. These cast iron buildings also have an interesting history in repurposing. They were originally constructed in 1866 by Pierre Lorillard III, who was the grandson of Pierre Abraham Lorillard, who founded the Lorillard Tobacco Empire, which would eventually become the largest tobacco manufacturer in the world. And they had a factory in Lower Manhattan. This was built, actually it's a combination of both cast iron elements and stone elements, masonry elements. It is attached at the back to a building that fronts 12th Street, which is in the upper left-hand corner for you. And it was at a time when this area was a booming commercial area, a high-end shopping district. Soon after the construction, the building served as the headquarters and showroom for Wilson's sewing machines. Allen Wilson invented some of the first successful sewing machines in 1850, and his company revolutionized the process by which clothing was manufactured and repaired. Another company that would make its home here was A.A. Vantine, which introduced imported crafts from Japan and became the #1 purveyor of imported Japanese goods in the United States. As the area changed, as the 19th century became the 20th century, the area's fortunes dipped, and the once fashionable district became more working class, more seedy. But in the midst of this grit and decay, as we move into the 20th century, 827 and 831 Broadway would actually become the center of an art revolution. In 1858, Willem de Kooning moved into a loft at the top floor of number 831. And this was common where artists, and this is a tradition that carries in well into the 20th century, latter half of the 20th century into the 21st, of artists finding spaces with big open windows that provide light that is conducive to their work. He was there during one of his most creative periods and remained there until he decamped from New York City entirely for East Hampton. De Kooning and his fellow abstract expressionists shifted the center of the art world from Paris to New York after World War II. And much of that artistic ferment took place in and around 827, 831 Broadway. Elaine de Kooning, artist, teacher, and chronicler of the American art scene, had a studio here at number 827 on the 3rd floor. She was working there on a commission of John F. Kennedy's official portrait for the Truman Library when he was killed in November of 1963. In years later, the noted abstract expressionist painter Larry Poons, Paul Jenkins, both also worked in the studios here. Jenkins moved into the building in 1963 and painted his celebrated work, Phenomena, 831 Broadway. William S. Rubin also resided here in the 1960s until 1974. He was the director of the Department of Painting and Sculpture at MoMA from 1973 to 1988 and is credited with playing, quote, a crucial role in the defining of the museum's character, collections, and exhibitions in the 1970s and 80s, according to the New York Times. For his loft, he hired what was then a young architect named Richard Meyer to redesign it, and it served as a showcase for his own considerable collection as well as a meeting place for the artists. So now we move on to this building is actually out of our usual catchment area, but it's one we advocated for designation, and I think it's also just a really interesting reuse of an unusual building. This three-story, three-bay facade with Neo-Greek and Queen Anne style ornament at 99 Worcester Street stands on the west side of the street between Spring and Prince. The firehouse was built in the early 1850s and was substantially redesigned by the prolific fire department architect Napoleon Lebrun and Son in 1881 to 82. The Gay Activists Alliance, which was established in December of 1969, 6 months after Stonewall, was a leading organization in the gay liberation movement. It was originally located elsewhere, and they started looking for a new place to live hold on, let me look at the year. Yeah, in August of 1873, while GAA was leasing the building, early GAA meetings took place at Church of the Holy Apostles, which is a New York City landmark at 309th Avenue at 28th Street. And then they began looking for a new place for its community center towards the end of 1970. The membership was growing, and they needed a larger meeting space as well as smaller rooms for office. In August of 1973, while GAA was leasing the building, Soho was designated a historic district by the Landmarks Preservation Commission on October 8th, 1974. The second and third floor were destroyed by arson, and the building suffered significant damage. As a result, the GAA was evicted from the building. In June of 2019, it, along with other LGBTQ sites, were designated individual historic landmarks. So now we're going to move down from Soho to Noho. This shows a building at 330 Bowery, built in 1874 and designed by Henry Engelbert. It is an individual landmark and part of the Noho Historic District Extension. This was originally built as the Bond Street Savings Bank, and it was later known as the German Exchange Bank, catering to what was then a primarily German population. This building features an expansive Bond Street facade, an ornate Second Empire detailing. Toward the end of the 19th century, it was put to general commercial use as a loft building, and then in 1963, it became the Bowery Lane Theater. It was designated a New York City landmark as early as 1967, which is kind of extraordinary since the New York City law went into effect in 1965. So moving up, we come to 423, 427 Lafayette Street, Astor Library on Joseph Papp Public Theater. This was New York's first public library, which was built with a bequest from John Jacob Astor. The building, which appears to be a unified structure, was actually erected in 3 separate campaigns, each with a different architect of record. The German-born and trained Alexander Salzer established the building's form with the use of the German round arch styled or Rundbogenstil, with its roots in North Italian Romanesque design. Salzer's design for the library was influenced by the Staatsbibliothek, which was built between 1831 and 42 in Munich. It was the first New York City library broadly accessible to the public. Later, the building served for many years as the headquarters of the Hebrew Immigrant Aid Society, but then was vacant and endangered in 1965, which is when theatrical producer Joseph Papp persuaded the city to acquire it. In 1966, Giorgio Cavalieri converted the building for the use as the Joseph Papp's Public Theater. The library, the original building of the library was built at a time during the mid-19th century when it was in an area with other institutions such as Cooper Union, City University of New York, also now known as NYU, the National Academy of Design, and the New York Historical Society. We couldn't do adaptive reuse without talking about Jefferson Market Library. This building was originally designed by architects Frederick Clark Withers and Calvert Vaux. The Jefferson Market Courthouse, as it was originally known, was constructed between 1874 and 1877. Their vision was so successful that other architect contemporaries in the 1880s voted it the fifth building of 10 of the most beautiful buildings in the United States. And it was originally built as referencing the Market building. Withers and Vaux drew on inspirations from Ruskinian Gothic models, and the inclusion of the clock tower for the use by the public recalls the civic-minded designs of piazza buildings in Renaissance Italy. The ornate building features multi-dimensional facades and paired windows within pointed arches, the varied heights of the roof, which includes the elaborate tower and the colorful materials and detail, can be seen from many viewpoints in this section of the village. After its time as a courthouse and other uses, such as a police academy, the building faced the wrecking ball in the post-World War II years. However, preeminent preservationist Margot Gale led a grassroots effort to save the building, and it found a new life as a branch of the New York Public Library in 1967. The library conversion was led by pioneering preservationist architect Giorgio Cavallari, an appropriate choice given his Northern Italian roots, and the building's European-inspired design. His work here was selected for the 1960 Honor Award by the American Institute of Architects, a tribute marked by a plaque near the 6th Avenue entrance. And the facade also received a thorough restoration between the years 2003 and 2012. So we're going a little west now at 251 West 13th Street, just on the east, just east of Greenwich and 8th Avenues. Sits really one of the most beautiful and interesting structures in that neighborhood. What was once the Jackson Square Library, one of New York City's first free circulating libraries, was built starting in 1887 by the architect Richard Morris Hunt. It was designed with a Flemish gable design. It reflects the look of a 17th century Dutch guild hall. The library was a gift to the New York Free Circulating Library, predecessor of the public library system, from George W. Vanderbilt III, perhaps best known as the man who built the largest home in the United States, the Biltmore Estate in Asheville, North Carolina. Richard Morris Hunt, who was a legendary figure of the Beaux-Arts period, as I said, was the designer. He was also one of the favorites of the Vanderbilt families. At the time, it was one of only 2 free circulating libraries, and it opened its doors in July 6th of 1888. This particular library, one of the very first, as I said, purpose-built open public libraries in New York, was also one of the first libraries to introduce the innovation of open stacks. This allowed the public to actually pick books up themselves rather than having to find a card number and a catalog and ask a librarian to retrieve the book for them, which was the standard at this point to avoid theft. The building continued to operate as a library until it was decommissioned in the early 1960s. Slated for demolition after this decommission, the building caught the eye of an avant-garde painter, sculptor, and performance artist, Robert Delford Brown. He acquired it in 1967 for a reported $125,000. I suspect it's worth a little more now, and commissioned modernist architect Paul Rudolph, chair of the Yale School of Architecture, to create what he called his first national church of the exquisite panic. The building passed hands to television producer Tom Fontana in 1965, who lives there and has his offices there to this day. And now we come to one of my favorite buildings, and I always say everything's my favorite building, but this is always such a joy to walk by whenever I'm walking down 13th Street. This is the Village Community Church at 143 West 13th Street. Arguably, I think it's one of the best examples of Greek revival in our area, given its temple front hexastyle design. Hexastyle refers to the 6 columns. I see that 13th Street is blocked out by the picture. I apologize for that. It didn't do that when I had it in the PowerPoint form. I shifted it to Google Sheets. So this Greek revival church was built in 1846. Its design is attributed to Samuel Thompson. It had been rebuilt according to its original design twice due to a fire, once in 1855 and again in 1902. It was originally known as the 13th Street Presbyterian Church. In subsequent years, as immigration changed in the neighborhood's demographics, the church merged with other Presbyterian congregations to remain afloat. By the 1960s, the church was even sharing its space with the synagogue. But by 1975, the congregation gave up the ghost and disbanded, putting the building up for sale. In one of the two great controversies to engulf the building then followed. A developer purchased the church to turn it into apartments, but the building was located within the newly designated Greenwich Village Historic District, which was designated in 1969. And the changes necessary to make the elegantly designed religious structure suitable for living, such as inserting windows and doors into the intact Greek revival facade, seemed incompatible with the landmark designation. So fervent opposition to this residential plan conversion followed, but a plan was eventually devised that allowed the redevelopment of the church to pass landmarks muster and remain and move ahead. In 1982, according to the design of architect Stephen B. Jacobs, all the windows and doors were inserted only into the sides of the church where they were scarcely visible, leaving all the exterior architectural detailing intact. The church's wrought iron gate remained. Even its message board, where the schedule of services or Bible quotes would normally appear, is preserved on the front of 13th Street, now just simply saying 141, 143, 145, indicating the addresses of the apartments within. The conversion really is so discreet, many assume that the building is still a functioning church and have no idea of the contention that surrounded this church and its conversion of its use. There are some really creative conversions that satisfy both building owner and the historic context of the neighborhood. One such building is at 171-173 McDougall Street. It's owned by the 10th Church of Christ Scientists. It's been owned since 1927 by that group. The building has been altered substantially since it became part of the Greenwich Village Historic District in 1969. The original Romanesque building was designed by Renwick, Aspinwall, and Russell architects in 1890 to 91 for manufacturing purposes. The first redesign of the original building came in 1966, so therefore predating the designation of the Greenwich Village Historic District. It was a radical conversion by architect Victor Christ-Janner. The modernist design emphasized this grand scale of the loft style building. It's really quite a radical change, creating a solid red brick exterior with only a single narrow opening. In 1969, when the Landmarks Preservation Commission designated the Greenwich Village Historic District, they described Christ-Janner's design as, quote, handsome but severely simple, end quote. The second restoration was completed in 2009, and it was initiated by the 10th Church of Christ Scientists' need to make necessary improvements to the church. They sold the upper portion of the building, which had been unused for many years, to a developer to help finance the costs. The 2009 renovation is an exceptional example of a sensitive reimagining that integrates modern elements into the original building design, and satisfying both the needs of the owner and the community. The two lower floors are veiled with a glass curtain wall that helps identify the public nature of the church's street level space, while the upper residential floors take full advantage of the surviving pilasters and arches with new windows that reinterpret the original design. The new cast glass cornice memorializes the Romanesque cornice that was removed in 1966 to make way for that renovation, but is updated using modern materials. The community was actually so enamored with the conversion that the project was awarded a Regina Kellerman Award in the 2009 Village Preservation Awards. And just to give you an understanding, the picture all the way to the left is from 1940. The picture in the middle shows the Christ Janner alteration, and the one to the right shows that facade being removed. I think what's so extraordinary is I can't imagine being on those upper floors with those window openings. Thank goodness they were left intact.
Sarah, hi.
Yeah.
We have just a quick request for you to go back to the previous slide for a second.
Sure.
Sorry to interrupt you.
No. Is there a question with that?
Gabrielle, is that good for you? She put it in the chat, so
okay.
I feel like it's okay to move on.
Yeah. All right. I just want to point out that I love the way the windows are pointed out. Also, I think that's such an interesting way to handle it, so that you're not trying to fool the observer into thinking that you're looking at the original windows. But I think it's an interesting way to handle the design of the building.
Yeah, they're so beautiful. Gabrielle says thanks. Thank you. Sorry to interrupt.
You're so welcome. All right, what do we have next? Isn't that an interesting one, though? I found that so interesting when I came across that story. So now we're moving to 632 Hudson Street. This is a fun one. This began its life in 1847 as two adjoining Greek Revival row houses when the neighborhood was developing as a home for merchants and moderately successful business people. One of the houses was built for the family of Stephen Kane, who was a sash maker. So that's more modest. And the other family was Richard Towning. And I have a picture here, not only of the building, obviously, to the left, which shows it in its current form, but in the upper right, again, we have the 1854 Paris map, which actually, if you know anything about street numbering in New York City, it changed quite a lot over the 19th century. Here, the numbers actually stay the same. And it's, I believe, 630 and 632 were the two buildings that got merged into becoming what's now known as 632 on Hudson. In 1881, Hugh King, an Irish immigrant, purchased both houses, and converted them into a general storefront and warehouse for his liquor importing and exporting business. By the late 19th century, this part of Greenwich Village, connected to the waterfront, was populated largely by Irish immigrants who built the area's churches and schools and gathering spaces. The remnants of King's original store's original signage is still visible above the first floor. And this was the time that the pediment was also installed. The cornice with the crowning pediment were installed, which capture his name, Hugh King, and the year that he had purchased it. The building's next adaptation was as a sausage factory. The Esteve family bought the building during World War II to make candy, according to Edward Esteve, the son of Maria and Edward Esteve, the owners of the Esteve Packing Corporation. As Spanish immigrants, they were part of the large Little Spain community founded in Manhattan's far west side area between Christopher Street and 23rd Street in the 20th century. The Esteve family switched to making sausage in the mid-1950s, so this was a sausage factory. Maria, the mother, ran the sausage factory while her husband, Edward, concentrated on more of the import-export of goods. By the way, I was lucky enough to be able to go in and look at this incredible building. And at the first floor, on the north part of the building, still intact were the pulleys, I guess, that would swing the sausages across the ceiling. It was kind of amazing. There's some perks to this job. So the sausage business closed later, and Maria refused to sell the building, hoping to launch another business after the sausage business wasn't able to continue, possibly a restaurant. When she died at the age of 97, the family sold the building, and in 1992, Karen Lashinsky and her mother came across what would remain of the two structures, which had been ignored for some time. And through the windows and the doors is almost 200 years of history brought to life in the adaptive reuse of it. And it's really extraordinary. Again, I was lucky enough to get a chance to tour it. This looks really grand, and it is. That she opened up the central space in one part of the building up to the roof. But she was also very smart in a lot of her the things that she added to the building, even describing, finding doors, on the sidewalk in Soho and getting a van and picking up these doors and then reusing them in the building. And there's so many like wonderful pieces throughout this building that that were things that she the inelegant term is dumpster dived for, dumpster dove for, but it's really an incredible space and an incredible building and an incredible reuse of the building, and still intact. You see the beautiful facade with its original cornice. So the last building that we're going to look at, which we would, again, just like Jackson Market Library, we would be remiss if we didn't look at Westbeth, of course. And this is probably the granddaddy of them all for adaptive reuse. It's located at 465 West Street, built in various stages between 1860 and 1903. It was the former Bell Labs complex. And it was converted in 1968 to 1970 to Westbeth Artist Housing. This was the first and largest publicly and privately funded artist housing project in the United States, as well as a pioneering large-scale industrial rehabilitation project. On August 7th, 1967, the J.M. Kaplan Fund and the newly constituted National Endowment for the Arts announced its plan for a project that would help transform Greenwich Village. The project was the conversion of the collection of buildings on the block surrounded by West, Bethune, Washington, and Bank Streets, along Greenwich Village's waterfront to subsidized housing and studios for artists. The adaptive reuse process was undertaken from 1968 to 1970 by Richard Meyer, and a carefully selected collection of community workers. And they were interested in innovations and community building. The duplex apartments were built along long corridors across 3 floors, such that all the doors to the apartments were on the same floor, meant to bring people closer to one another as neighbors by seeing more people. A narrow existing courtyard, which I show here, is the organizational focus for the whole complex. By removal of the roof and 2 floors, this courtyard was open to the sky. Semicircular steel balconies project from the apartments to provide additional egress from the duplex units and to engage the courtyard space. Besides the residential units for the artists to live and work, also included in the design were gallery space, theatrical facilities, and film, photography, and dance studios, providing the residents with the total environment in which to pursue their work, from conception to performance or to display. And I think actually one of my favorite things about this building was, you can see it, if you look at the building on the upper left corner, that picture shows the building from the bird's eye view. And on the right-hand side, you can still see intact the original High Line that used to run through this building. That's definitely one of my favorite things, including pieces like that in adaptive reuse buildings that serve different purposes. And so that is all of my presentation, and I made it just under an hour, which is pretty good. Are there any questions, Ariel?
Hello.
Hi.
Sarah, thank you so much for that amazing tour. Such a gift. Okay, so we have a couple of questions, but folks, if you have more, please feel free to submit them. Let's see.
And I'm going to start this by saying that I always get asked questions that I don't immediately have the answer to. So I am happy to send follow-up emails if there's any such question.
You are incredible and diligent in this way. Interesting. Okay, so we had a question about the First National Church of the Exquisite Panic, which when you said that, I gasped. And I did a quick Google search, but I couldn't find very much about it.
Yeah, I remember hearing about this when we were looking into this building. It was supposed to be on a house tour and we were looking into this building, but I didn't really get into that part of the history of it. I mostly was looking at the library, but I'm happy to look into this, and that might be a really good blog post.
I was thinking that as well. Yeah, so great.
Andrew knows more about it than we do.
I would imagine.
He talked about it.
Oh, great. Yes, I saw the Wikipedia too. Oh, thanks for all your thanks, everybody. So interesting. We have a question from Scott. I think what it says is, how do researchers come up with such extensive histories? And I'm wondering if this might be a good candidate for the video of your talk about research methods. What do you think?
Yeah, I did. We've done a couple of talks on that. One was where we focused on the East Village building blocks and how we researched those buildings. But then there's also been a discussion in general, right, that I did on research methods. There's so many, New York City has so many incredible resources. Like, you don't want to research anywhere else. Trust me, I have. And so there's like so many tremendous resources. One of the things we included with that too was a list of sources to hit. So that's something that we could direct him to.
Yeah, maybe what I'll do is I'll include those links in our follow-up email.
If I remember correctly, that was one of my first presentations, which
on Zoom.
I was new to Zoom, and there's no judgment.
We were all new to Zoom. We're still
I was trying to do
Zoom.
it in real time, and it didn't work out, but I did my best.
That's all we can do. Well, BJ wants to know, is the chorizo factory now apartments?
It's this space that this woman owns that people can rent out, as far as I can tell, like one of those early 20-something reality shows was actually filmed there and stuff like that. But it's a breakup of different spaces, and even in the basement there's but I think Karen does maybe have like, no, I think she really has it to herself, but she has rented it out to other people. But it's an incredible space that's broken up into all these different spaces, including at the basement. I mean, everybody thinks they have a speakeasy. Their house was a speakeasy, but she has like a false wall. And so she made it into what looks like a speakeasy. This is an incredible space.
That's so impressive. Wild.
I'm gonna go have a drink there.
That sounds great. I mean, it's a great thing to do on a Friday afternoon, though maybe not during a pandemic.
Well, if anybody thinks of any questions or comes up with any follow-up things or wants resources, you can always email me, and my email is on our website.
Okay. that sounds, yeah,
Is
that's,
there anything else that's come up?
there, there are a couple of things that have come up. David Mulkins wants to know if there's any possibility of an illustrated guidebook on this topic.
Sure. You know, I don't know. I don't know. That's a good question. One of the things that was so overwhelming was how many, you know, like I could be here all night talking about this. And I almost felt like you had to divide it up by type and maybe by area or something like that. I don't know of one for New York City. Oh, I take that back. I take that back. I had a class when I was in grad school that talked about additions and transformations. It's done globally. It's by Byard, Paul Byard. But I don't know of one specifically for New York, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's out there. But the one that a professor of mine wrote was Paul Byard. I think I have that right. Additions and transformations.
Cool. I'm gonna find a link for that to everybody and put it in our follow-up email.
I have the copy of it right over here in my bookshelf.
I'll come over. Oh, that's so great. Well, thanks everyone for being here and for all of your kind comments. So lovely. Sarah, many accolades are coming your way.
Oh, you're very kind.
Thank you. Thank you
for putting up with the first time I did this. Whenever I do a presentation the first time, I was like, oh, I didn't want to put that in there. So
I thought it was great.
Thanks for being the audience.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much, everyone, and stay warm. Have a sweet weekend, and hopefully we'll see you soon.